Happy Friday. Welcome back to another episode of Murder, Mysteries, and More. My name is Kaylee.
My name's Desi.
Be sure to like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell next to the subscribe button to turn on post notifications. Before we get into this case, we always encourage those who have useful information to any unsolved case, please report to your local police and sheriff department. And I do want to put a disclaimer out there. So, this video is not recommended for persons below the age of 18 years old. It will contain some graphic details. If you cannot handle this or you are under the age of 18, please click off now.
In 1955, Jim Jones was inspired to build a church congregation called the People's Temple focused on social injustice. Although he was a white man, he attracted mostly African American members. And what started as a good thing quickly turned sour after he started to use and abuse drugs. In May 1977, the Temple's people opened in Jonestown. Sadly, due to his narcissistic behavior, drug and alcohol use, and abuse of power, it led down a path down to the Jonestown massacre.
So, who was Jim Jones? So, Jim Jones was born on May 13th, 1931, in Crete near Lynn, Indiana. So his parents were Lynetta and James Jones, and his father James was actually a World War I veteran. James lived off of disability checks, and that was because he was a victim of chemical warfare during the war. His father was emotionally absent and didn't show any affection at all towards his son. His mother, Lynetta, she was free spirited, which at this time that was not normal. Most women back then, they kind of kept to themselves because if they didn't, they would have been judged for having an opinion about something. She was not religious at all. She was reserved and she constantly worked. And to be honest, she really did not want to have children. However, she still ended up pregnant and she gave birth to James, aka Jim Warren Jones, but we are going to refer to him as Jim. And Jim's childhood lacked love. He was home alone all the time. Nobody really cared about him. And during high school, Jim wore Sunday clothes, so he wore a white pressed shirt and slacks, so typical church boy clothes.
Jim formed his own baseball team with the kids on the block. He sucked at sports, but he was a great leader. And as a team, he attended and tried out many different churches around town in Lynn, Indiana. He carried his Bible with him everywhere. He even went to public places such as the mall and preached. 17-year-old Jim worked at the local hospital as an aide, and his job entailed cleaning vomit, moving the newly deceased, and helping dispose of amputated limbs. Sounds nasty.
There.
Yeah. And crazy for a 17-year-old to be doing. Jim very much enjoyed his job despite all of this, so much that at one point he wanted to study medicine and become a doctor or a surgeon. In 1948, he met a nursing student who worked there, and her name was Marceline, and they fell in love. Marceline described him as a genuine, caring person that just wanted to help others. June 1949, the couple tied the knot, and Marceline thought Jim was a devoted Christian, but he was not. Shortly after they got married, she noticed he acted completely different.
So Jim actually told Marceline that he didn't believe in her God, and this obviously would cause major conflict between the two. However, at this time, divorce was frowned upon, so she decided to stick it out. Jim took Marceline to local African American churches. He did state that he would rather go to an African American church instead of a white church, and that was because it was more lively. People were actually dancing, singing during worship, and it seemed like they were having a good time. And the church he eventually became a member of accepted both him and his wife with welcome arms. In 1952, at 21 years old, Jim became a student pastor at the church. And after a year of preaching, Jim decided, okay, I'm tired of being told what to do, so I want to open my own church. So he decided he wanted to open a church in Indianapolis, and he blended both Christianity, New Age spirituality, and radical social justice at his church. He also chose to have an integrated church instead of a segregated church. At this time, most churches were segregated. However, Jim wanted everybody to feel welcome.
His wife, Marceline, worked alongside him, and she kept track of the paperwork, scheduling, and made sure everything was organized. The church was a huge success, but quickly became too small for all of their followers. Jim needed a bigger place, but because the current church was in a low income area, he couldn't really ask for money. Jim then tried a different approach, and he claimed to the crowd he could perform miracles. For example, he would say, I command your headache to vanish. Poof, it would. Afterwards, Jim would say, healed by the power of God has granted through him. A word quickly spread because of this, and more people believed he was a miracle healer. He also passed around collection plates, and the dollars started to rack up. Make it rain, bitch! He would he would also attend other local churches as a guest host, and this also drew more members to him. Jim also would use his friends as audience plants, so they would pose as members and pretend to be sick. Then when Jim performed his miracles, they would pretend that they were healed.
So, this obviously led more people to believe that he could truly heal people. At one point, one of his audience plants claimed they suffered from cancer, and then they started jumping up and down, saying that Jim healed them from cancer, even though that even though they never had cancer in the first place. And after a while, he did gain enough money, so he purchased a building that could host up to 700 people in Indianapolis. And he was originally going to call it the Community Unity. However, he decided to change the name because the building had the word temple etched into it. And this building actually used to be a Jewish congregation, and the new name was People's Temple. Jim wanted to integrate Black people into the Indianapolis community, so he would bring them to white restaurants to protest for equality. And he did this until the owners agreed to serve all people regardless of their race. And Jim also made sure that any owner that agreed to serve everyone, he made sure that they would get plenty of customers because he was devoted to promoting equality.
In 1965, Jim and his wife moved to Ukiah, California. 50 to 60 church members did follow the couple and also moved to California. In 1969, his church was not as popular as it used to be back in Indianapolis. His marriage was falling apart. He had 4 children, of which one was biological and the 3 were adopted. Jim also at this time had an affair with one of the younger church member girls, and this went against his own word. This went against his own word. He told members to be faithful and don't cheat on your wife. Meanwhile, he was getting it on the side with another whammon. He realized if any of the members found out, they would be furious and it would destroy his reputation. He came clean to his wife Marceline at the time, and Marceline was bedridden. He used that as an excuse to justify the affair and also claimed the affair wasn't so bad because it was only sexual and not emotional. What? That doesn't. That doesn't. That's not how that works, buddy.
It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Although Marlene didn't really have a choice but to just accept the situation as it is because, like we said, divorce was not common back then. So.
And she was also bedridden.
Yeah, so she didn't have a choice. She kind of had to rely on him at that point. Jim eventually came clean to the members, and surprisingly, the members supported his decision. 1970, he had built up a good following at this point.
So Jim brought some of his members to travel with him to Los Angeles and Seattle. He wanted to gain even more followers and more money. He would perform sermons outside of venues, and he did make those who attended the sermons fill out paperwork with their mailing address. He mailed people pamphlets of what was going on at his church, all the miracles he performed, and he received money donations as well. And with all the money he received, they fed low income families, they opened second-hand item stores, and they even paid college tuition for teens who couldn't afford it. The People's Temple built two additional churches, one in Los Angeles and San Francisco. And Jim put fear into his own members. And he said that the racists were trying to shut them down and were threatening to harm them. And slowly over time, Jim um, evolved into a controlling judgmental attitude towards members who didn't spend as much time at the church as he wanted them to. Going to the movies was prohibited, and money was better spent towards donating to the church.
He discouraged romantic relationships because it was distracting. Drinking and doing drugs was bad, and couples who joined church were allowed to stay as couples, but they got limited time due to temple chores/duties. They bought a dozen buses and made trips from San Francisco to Los Angeles and Seattle. Jim still used insiders for healings. It got to the point that Jim would call out a random person's name that he had on an index card, and he claimed that this member had cancer and they didn't know it. Then he sent a nurse to swab out their mouth to prepare for the healing. The nurse would then have hidden chicken liver that they would put in the people's throats. Obviously, it caused them to gag and spit it out. The nurse called it cancer, Jim yelled spit it out, and boom, their lives would be saved. In 1971, Jim started to use and abuse drugs. He used both pills and liquids to boost his energy in the morning, and at night he took sleepy time pills.
And shortly after he started abusing the drugs, his personality changed for the worse. He became short tempered, his eyes were watery and red. And remember, in the beginning of his pastor career, he was a very genuine, caring man who just wanted to help people. But unfortunately, drugs are known to alter the state of mind, and his drug abuse kickstarted a change that caused him to become possessive, controlling, manipulative, paranoid, and the list goes on. And most members did not question this, and I do want to mention that cults are very notorious for brainwashing people, and there are very difficult and dangerous to leave. He started wearing glasses, and the reason his excuse for that was his inner powers were so great and holy energy would glow from his eyes. He told his followers if they stared at the holy glow from his eyes, they would burn and die. Jim preached to his followers that any form of government was dangerous to their well-being and it's best to stay away. He also said that both the FBI and CIA were tapping the temple's phone line.
Well, alright then. This made the followers very paranoid and thought the government was planning on attacking them. Members called Jim and his wife Mom and Dad. Jim and his wife were frugal, they drove old cars, and they didn't buy anything new clothing. And the reason for this was because Jim didn't want to come off as better than anybody else. Jim's drug issues worsened, and he had multiple affairs with different members, as most cult members tend to do.
Yeah.
And as this went on, his ego grew larger, and he believed all women of any age were attracted to him, which sounds very predatory.
Very.
Yeah. Members of the inner circle considered sexual relations with him a part of church duties. What the fuck?
Yeah, like this is where it gets really bad.
Nah. And Jim decided one day he needed to find his promised land, a place where he and his church members could live freely and safely without judgment. October 1973, a few of the members determined Guyana, South America would be the promised land. It was chosen because the location was convenient. Boats were able to make the trip from Miami to Guyana's capital, Georgetown. Jim did want a fairly isolated place, and Guyana's total population was 850,000 people.
And most of the population lived along the coast, and the rest of the area was covered in dense forest with zero connecting roads. Jim told his followers that the new location of the temple would allow them to avoid American martial law and concentration camps. He put fear into his followers and stated that the FBI and CIA were going to shut them down by bringing in a bunch of guns and just start shooting them. In May 1977, Jonestown opened. Jonestown had cottages for people to live in, but since hundreds of people showed up, there was not enough room. So the followers chipped in money and they had more cottages built. Jim had full control of Jonestown, so no crops could be planted without his permission, no tools purchased without any approval, and any follower who wanted a romantic relationship had to apply for approval. And the same with breakup and divorce, they had to be all approved by Jim. And all the incoming mail was opened and read before it was given to the recipient.
Any outgoing mail Hold on. Any outgoing mail letter said that anything negative about Jonestown, the letter would not be sent out. Whoever wrote the letter was forced to rewrite the letter, and escaping the cult was near impossible. Also, want to mention that at the time, while the temple was being built, Jim never forced anyone to go, but also want to say we aren't victim blaming either. There's no privacy at all. Jonestown had limited water supply for hot showers, and the water was polluted. Jim had his own cabin where he lived with his wife and a couple of mistresses. His cabin also had a generator that powered his fridge, fans, his beds were super comfy, and everyone else did not get this luxury and lived in even worse conditions. He even had his own radio intercom system for announcements. Jonestown was funded by members' social security checks, and despite this, money was tight, so members started to manufacture toys.
So the toys were wooden cars and trains, and they were sent to Georgetown to be sold. Even with the extra money from selling the toys, they struggled to stay afloat, and food was quickly running out. Anyone who did not comply was forced to sleep separately from the other members. They also had to run everywhere, and no one could speak or even look at them. The population grew to 900 people, and all had to attend required nightly meetings. Jim would give his personal accounts of recent US and world news, and the news was obviously faked and twisted. He did not actually say what was actually going on. And people worked every day until 6 p.m., and Jim quickly became frustrated. Many followers were unsatisfied because it was too crowded, they were overworked, and they got very little sleep because his speeches will last until 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning. And they couldn't just leave Jonestown either. Their passports were locked up. If they wanted to leave, they had to pay for it. And all the money that was earned was typically taken away to fund Jonestown. A handful of followers did escape, and a few had enough money to leave. Those that paid to leave had to sign a contract that stated they would never talk badly about the church.
Some members that were able to escape spoke to the media about the church and their experience with the church. Newspapers started to write negatively about Jim, and back at Jonestown, Jim told his followers troops were coming to take away their kids and they needed to fight. Jim knew that the United States was looking into him because of what was being said about him. His followers had no idea of what was really going on, and they did not have access to news except for the news that Jim gave them, which was false news. Jim also made sure to get guns smuggled, and he set up a security team to protect people from attacks. And also in that same instance, security also made sure that nobody left. Followers were terrified for their lives because security threatened them, and any member who would try to escape would get shot by security. February 1978, Jim went on the intercom and stated that this was an emergency meeting. He told people soldiers were coming to attack them, CIA was onto them, and an attack would happen within hours.
He stated that the soldiers' intention was to murder all of the followers in Jonestown, including the children. For the children, Jim told the kids that instead of the soldiers killing them, they should kill themselves, instead to avoid these monsters. He said this would rob their enemies of triumph. Some followers agreed with this, but some were not so sure, and large containers containing a mysterious liquid were brought out. Members were told to line up, fill their cup with the liquid, and drink. Now, for this time, it did not contain any cyanide. For this was a test, but if it did, the cyanide poison drink would kill them within 40 minutes. While this was going on, Jim was on his podium preaching and said their death would be peaceful. And Jim also said after people drank the mixture that they didn't actually take anything. This was just a test to see if they were willing to die for the cause. And like I said, this time it didn't contain the poison, and he let the followers off for the rest of the day because they complied. And this is when Jim knew he had control over all the people in Jonestown.
Jim continued to abuse drugs, and this is the part of the reason why he became so unpredictable, dangerous, and paranoid. Families in the U.S. of members of Jonestown grew concerned, and they kept receiving concerning letters. People pressed authorities to investigate Jonestown because something fishy was going on. November 1978, United States Congressman Leo Ryan traveled to Guyana. He went there to investigate the temple people and their activities, and he was also investigating rumors such as cult members being held against their own will and suffering from physical and psychological abuse. November 17th, he arrived and planned on leaving the following day after the investigation was conducted. The members seemed fairly happy, and at the end of the day, he was planning on leaving and heading back to the United States. But while Ryan was walking to his car, several members approached him and asked for a ride. He agreed, and they headed back to the airport so they could get back to the United States.
Security saw this and shot the truck. The people in the truck were able to drive off and they were not hurt. They did make it to the airstrip, but security members have followed them and shot them. So 5 people were killed, including the congressman. 11 people were wounded. At 4 p.m., Jim made an announcement that there was a meeting at the pavilion. These sermons were all recorded on tape. Jim told his people he tried to give them the best life he could and that someone on the plane was going to shoot the pilot. He said that the Jonestown people would be blamed. He said enemies would soon arrive. Jim stated he had a solution that would save the kids from enslavement and seniors from slaughter. He told everyone it was time to drink the mixture. This time, the mixture actually did have cyanide. And he said they were not committing suicide, but this is a revolutionary act. Some members refused to drink or tried to leave, and this was all captured on a tape recording.
However, we do not recommend listening to the tapes. We have not listened to them ourselves. They are out there, but it is absolutely horrifying, and 10 out of 10 would not recommend it.
Yep, no.
Don't do it. But to no surprise, the members drank the mixture, and the following day, the Guyana defense went into Jonestown and saw the most gruesome, horrific scene. Dead bodies everywhere. Some had markings where the poison was injected, and those with markings are believed to refuse the drink, and they were forcibly injected with the poison. Jim's body was on the stage of the pavilion, and Jim and his mistresses were the only ones who died from a gunshot wound to the head rather than the poison. The original death count was 383, and word quickly spread to the United States. Not too long after, American troops were sent out there to investigate. More bodies were found, and a week later, 909 deaths were accounted for.
Investigators found over 60,000 printed pages, several hundred tape recordings, and the FBI spent several hours going through all this. In his cottage, $700,000 were found lying in a suitcase. He also had several bank accounts with money in it, and it took months to identify victims. Many of the bodies, unfortunately, were too decomposed to identify. 409 out of the 909 bodies were able to be identified. Evergreen Cemetery in Oakland, California offered a ground for the mass grave for the unidentified bodies. May 11th, 1979, 409 people were laid to rest. All his churches were seized and shut down, and all 7 million from his bank accounts were seized and used to repay the victim's family. Money, drugs, and probably even mental health disorder is what caused him to go haywire.
Bro needed to be put in a 4x4 grippy sock white room.
Yes.
Is what it sounded like to me. But into Reddit comments, our Reddit post for today is by Anoldo. Was there a way to escape the massacre in Jonestown? Summer Leah 623. The only way to escape was to simply have ignored the call to the pavilion and hide under a bed or something. Leslie Wagner Wilson, wife of airstrip killer Joe Wilson, had a hunch something would happen that day, and early in the morning began the hike into the jungle with the group. Her spidey senses saved her life. Had I known about her plans, I would have joined her, but once inside the pavilion, the only way out would have been to knock over the vat, even though that would have almost certainly resulted in the henchmen around Jones who had guns shooting you to death. He probably would have saved lives and gone down in history as a hero. Which is true, but you were not there, so
Yeah.
that did not happen. These people were following a crazy man, and they killed themselves.
They were very brainwashed.
They were very brainwashed.
And at that point, it was basically too late.
Yeah, you would either A, take the poison, or B, be shot, or C, be forced to do it.
Yep.
So, yeah, we would have had to escape earlier.
Titty Swan. They had such a huge stockpile of drugs that they could have just made another barrel up, though. It might have been enough to make the crowd hard to contain while they wait, but I think it would have just delayed it.
Necessary Cream, 1845. I always thought I would pretend to drink the poison and then pretend to be dead. However, I found out that they went around and checked the bodies with a stethoscope for heartbeats, so I wouldn't have made it. No.
Yeah.
That's crazy. They checked heartbeats. Deleted says, I know I'm very late, but there was one survivor who, when told to drink, he simply said, I don't want to die, and the guard said, okay, have a nice life, and let him walk away. But he was the only person to have this happen to him. I wonder why it was just the one guy.
He got very lucky.
Yeah, what? Why just him? Why not other people?
Yeah.
Weird.
Chris Londo, there was an elderly woman who slept during the massacre under her bunk, along with the elderly deaf man Grover Davis, pretended to be dead in a ditch once the massacre commenced.
True. Jim Jones was known as one of America's most dangerous cult leaders. He brainwashed people so bad that they believed he even cured cancer. Unfortunately, November 17th, 1978 ended in tragedy where hundreds of people died from cyanide poison massacre. Hopefully this serves as a lesson on how dangerous cults can be and the signs you should look out for. Thank you for listening to another episode of Murder, Mysteries, and More. Remember to always keep your eyes open because you never know when someone's creeping or when you might just die from cyanide poisoning.
Yep.